Hello there. So good afternoon to you. Good morning to you. Or maybe good evening to you as well. Depends on the time you are tuning in onto this afternoon. It's afternoon here in the UK, by the way. So we are continuing the reading of that historical piece, Blood on the Niger. It is our reading brunch time, so to say. So if you stumble on this, maybe it's your lunchtime at work, or just you getting to work as well for your breakfast. It's the reading time on the Maiyegun's Diary Political. It's brunch time though. So you can listen to this broadcast like you are listening to a podcast, an audio, or what do you call it, radio podcast. So it's a reading segment. And you can get on with anything you're doing, like this morning, if you're watching me this early. It's not that early though. However, for those of you who have been following this reading, we are currently at chapter 8. Chapter 8 of Blood on the Niger, the untold stories of the Nigeria genocidal war called the Civil War. The war that the perpetrators, the war criminals on the Nigerian part, to be precise, who committed a serious war or crimes against humanity. They were never punished. The majority of them were mostly even rewarded for what they did. But for posterity's sake, I know a lot of people have been told all kinds of lies historically. However, some verifiable piece of history in some of these written books, they are there for us to learn from history so that we don't repeat the same thing. So thank you so much. If you have been following, great. If you have a copy of this book and you have read it before, you can read with us again. And if you don't have a copy, well, maybe reading it may inspire you to get yourself one. A lot of there's been a lot of pieces for pieces on what happened during the Nigeria genocidal war, the roles every one of them played, right? So anyway, we've gotten to the parts. In fact, this book actually really detailed more of the atrocities of the people who are supposed to come and liberate, the areas purportedly captured by the Biafran Army. Or rather than go after the soldiers like themselves, those who had guns to fight, like go after them. They didn't. They went after civilians, and the people of the Midwest region suffered so greatly, especially the Igbos of this Midwest region, to the point that the majority of them were later forced to change their names and at the same time deny their Igbo ancestry just to stay alive. So it's more detailed. And yes, you can read with us. You can just listen, and yeah, and you can also get by, get on with whatever you are doing this morning. You don't really have to sit there to engage here with the broadcast per se. Okay. Good morning and good afternoon to you. Thank you so much, right, for joining me. So again, I will read, and then I'll be having a short break to explain a little bit. So it is going to be a 2 straight hours reading, and yeah, we'll see how many. We'll see how many. Man, look at this list. Ibusa bush rescue operation. Okay, these are the number of people that got eventually. It's quite an interesting book. Okay, but let's continue. This is chapter 8. Okay. The first quotes from Seneca. There are all sorts of ruin. One is the work of time, the other of men. Of all ruins, the ruin of man is the saddest. Right? Thank you. Toto is up as well. That's grand. All right, let's get started. Okay. So the second operation, that's chapter 8 now.
The Biafran Army guerrilla activities in the Midwestern area intensified by 1968. Infiltrations through Abala, Osisa, and other bush areas of Abo and Aniocha were reported. By May 1968, scores of federal troops had been killed in ambushes. Somewhere on the border between Aniocha and Kwale, the town of Ishagu emerged as the booming market center for besieged Biafran traders who invaded the area in search of essential food items, rice, salt, bicycles, tires, and other products of the Nigerian industries. Ishagu replaced Onitsha in a way as the market center where you could sell or buy a human head once the price is right. The Biafran government needed the thriving market if its starving population would stave off the doomsday. However, the federal military strategists watched the development of the market with the greatest concern. In the first place, Ishagu's strategic location placed it as the gateway to the Biafran hinterland, while at the same time it commanded the approach to Warri, the oil-producing city of the Midwest. Ishagu is also another meeting point of the Yoruba and Igbo-speaking peoples of the Midwest, who were then expediently linked by the new booming markets. So therefore, the federal concern revolved on how the Ishagu market and large-scale transportation of essential commodities affected the prosecution of the war. The Biafran attack trade was therefore regarded as a direct assault on the declared federal policy of total blockade of the Biafran enclave. The subsequent interaction of Biafran agents, traders, soldiers with the natives, who were linguistically similar, was a dangerous development to the security of the Nigerian Army in that area. To allow the market to continue to thrive was therefore another way of prolonging the war. On May 2nd, 1968, following Biafran further harassment of the federal troops, the Federal Army at the sector massively moved into Ishagu village, and by the time the dusk operation ended the following morning, the market had been razed to the ground and the town sacked. Over 200 people, including His Royal Highness Oyema, were killed. There was the striking case of a woman who refused to leave after witnessing the execution of her husband and her only son. With her bare hand, she scratched and fell on the trigger-happy soldiers. Mrs. Ogwaji was instantly gunned down. Around the village maternity, young men were separated from their families and shot. Also shot was the village's only veterinary doctor, Mr. Ejoor, who had been having it rough with the soldiers. The Nigerian television reporter, Julie Okonji, also lost her father and two brothers in the Ishagu carnage. However, the eldest man in the village was spared, and Diokpa, as he was fondly called, reported after the war that the federal soldiers treated him well. Ishagu, with its booming Afro market, disappeared and was, like Carthage, overgrown by grass until 1970. When people returned and started life anew. While Ishagu burned, one of her sons was in the dark, dangerous, and bloody alleys and trenches of Abagana, leading many of the federal assault for the capture of Onitsha. Ferocious Lieutenant Cyril Iweze of the Nigerian 2nd Division and many other Western Igbos in both armies were shedding their blood in a war that sacrificed their people and made their land the battleground of the two armies that regarded them at best as war utilities or worse. with the greatest suspicion. The massive destruction and human brutality at Ishu was confirmed when 21 years later, Blessing Udo of the respected Newswatch Communications, writing in the sister publication Quality, noted that for 18 years, Thomas Obi sat on the traditional stool of Ishiagu in Aniocha, local government area of Bender State, as a regent, doing the will of his people. He was chosen to sit in for his younger cousin, Ignatius Onyema, who was then too young to occupy the stool, made vacant by the death of his father, John Ezechino Onyema, who had just been killed by federal soldiers during the Nigerian Civil War. Biafrans gunned down Reverend Brother Roman Wyszynski. So the Biafrans' reappearance at Ogwaji was marked with vengeance. St. Mary's Catholic Hospital was the first target. 6 soldiers were forcibly carried out and shot. The German doctor in charge of the hospital could not believe his eyes and referred the charging Biafrans to the Geneva Convention on the Treatment of the Sick in Hospitals. Hospitals, according to the doctor, were never targets of military assault. He wanted his patients released. He might as well have been talking to the deaf. As the hospital was being charged, another Biafran company wandered out from the bush and seized the Ogwaji Ibusa road. In a few minutes, the Volkswagen B2 car traveling from Asaba pulled to a stop. A white man was at the wheels. At once, the company commander dragged him out and arrested him. But it was only a reverend brother from St. Patrick's College, Asaba, on his way to pick up the school's mail at Ogwaji Post Office. He took his time to explain in details his profession, his mission, and his contribution to the welfare of the refugees at the college compound. Most of the expected mail was for the refugee rehabilitation and reconstruction programs at the college. But the Biafran commander was not convinced. He was led into the backyard quarters of the Ogwaji post office. A couple from Asaba turned up and identified the gentleman as a Reverend Brother Wyszynski, who was the principal of St. Patrick's College before the war. When the couple saw the ashen color of the Reverend's face, they joined in pleading for his life. But the Biafran commander had made up his mind. This man is a mercenary. He bellowed. The Reverend brother, with his veins popping out, continued to beg for his life, repeating that he was not a soldier. The couple took to their heels when the company commander threatened their lives. Few seconds later, a pop sound dropped this innocent servant of God. Later, the Biafran soldiers' rampage took on another dimension as all the cattle and their Fulani rearers in town were executed. The post office and the surrounding secretariat were soon to be turned into battlegrounds. Surprised federal troops regrouped, and when the Biafrans finally withdrew, the former took their turn to look for civilian collaborators, many of whom were summarily executed. Ibusa on Easter Monday, 1968. Celebrating Easter in Ibusa, 1968, was an attempt to return to the lush traditions of Roman feast and merrymaking. Many Ibusa boys had returned home. According to a history teacher, Mr. Patrick Okole of St. Thomas College, Ibusa, the boys from the Biafran Army spent time telling us stories about our people in the bush. We thought they were on a goodwill reunion visit. Surprisingly, the following day, Easter Monday, they struck and dislodged the federal platoon based at the Anioche Primary School and immediately moved into the town. The purpose of this operation remained, as in the case of Ishiagu, economic. Ibusa was a gateway to Biafra through the bush to Atani. The surrounding bushes and farms became a sanctuary for the civilians running from the war. These civilians who turned to farming produced ample food, which the Biafrans needed. With the sacking of Ishagu, the Biafran agents used Ibusa to ferry essential items to Biafra. It was a new lifeline for Biafra. Federal Command, therefore, engaged in constant patrol of the bushes, permanently placed troops on the alert to obstruct the Biafran life corridor. On the other hand, the Biafrans needed to neutralize the obstacle and keep the corridors open. However, when the message reached the brigade commander that Ibusa had fallen to Biafrans, Colonel Godwin Ali personally led the attack to fish out the Biafrans. According to Mr. Okole, the Federal Army did not intentionally kill innocent civilians. However, suspects were attacked, and in this way, many innocent people were killed, and even domestic animals were not spared. The civilians took to their heels, and many ran into the bush. Houses were razed to the ground, and a battalion strength of Nigerian soldiers occupied the town. After some months in the bush, people wanted to return to their town, but the Biafrans guerrillas under the command of one Michael Nwaelum, alias Oliewu Naji, the one that ate the goats and his foal, issued an order banning people from returning home. This former thug with the NCNC would torture, flog, and detain in the bunker escapees caught on the run. Michael, a short man with powerful muscles and calves, had weakness for women. He had no respect for chiefs either. Escapees later reported the menace to the Nigerian Army, who in turn organized a patrol to confront Oliewu Nahaji. Then the Biafran Vandals, clad in the thick green battle camouflage colors of the Federal Army with ammunition and weaponry stolen or captured from both armies. These men, called the Biafran Vandals, fought their own battles and obeyed no command. On the marshland of the lower Niger, in those villages of Abo and Ndokwa areas, these soldiers of mainly Western Igbo origin congregated in scattered bush camps. Most of them were stragglers of the Biafran Army that were stranded by the federal flanking move, which cut off the old southern units of the Biafran Army. Because they did not believe in Biafra and felt betrayed by the Biafran inexplicable sudden withdrawal, they preferred to stay back in the Midwest. Their grouse against the Federal Army was the wanton killing of many of their brethren during the flushing of Biafrans from those Igbo-speaking areas of the Midwest. In fact, many of their new recruits were those civilians who absconded into the bush following the rampage of the Federal Army through their villages. Gradual recruitment never exceeded 100 for easy control and discipline, says Peter Pan, the leader of the group at Atani, Abo, and Kwale axis. At Ushisha, the Vandals occupied a visible camp and had a bold signboard depicting their name, Dr. I.K. Ndolo, a professor of communications at Howard University in Washington, D.C., who was a front commander for the Biafran Army 1st Commando Division, recalls that, he wrote, the Biafran Army's first contact with this group was a disaster. The 1st Commando Division of the Biafran Army in 1968, under Colonel Achuzia, was returning to the Midwest with the sole aim of forestalling the federal threat to Uli Airport and attempting for the second time to establish his presence in the Midwest. The 16th Commando Brigade at Uchi was to attack the Udokwa areas and move up to Asaba through Oko and Atani areas. In these operations, we encountered the Biafran Vandals in real battles, and they would always have my respect. The activities of the Biafran Vandals have already been noticed and hailed by the natives. There were many itinerant armed and dangerous soldiers around who victimized the people regularly. The Biafran Vandals took it upon themselves to establish jungle justice and as far as possible preserve some iota of law. The most prominent case was the destruction caused by one Oponku and his itinerant bandits who terrorized innocent civilians. Peter Pan, Nwakwo Nwabueze, the powerful outflying schemer for the legendary Rangers International Football Club of Enugu, believed that this unit was the greatest fighting group in the world. He wrote, I was in the Biafran Army that was cut off at Ore. I went into the bush and after many days found myself at Ewulu, a town a few kilometers off Ogwaji. Here, I made my way again into the bush and met one farmer residing there with his family. In no more time, I discovered that many farmers in the bush were exhibiting military characteristics, and we naturally came together. Most of the young farmers were Midwestern Igbos who did not want anything to do with Nigeria or Biafra. Our first battle was against a Biafran unit formerly headed by one brutal officer called Oponku. The natives complained about his terrorism and looting proclivity. We went to battle, captured and executed him on the spot. The natives immediately started cooperating with us and my men decided to appoint me leader of the band. We engaged in many other battles against independent federal units or soldiers out to exploit the native for personal spoils. We acquired a lot of arms, food, and uniform from these units. At a stage, we captured the pay box of the Federal Army. A commander of Biafran Army heard of our loots and wanted the money returned to his headquarters. We refused to surrender the money, for we thought it was not for the Biafran Army that never participated in the battle. The Biafran Army headquarters declared us wanted, dead or alive. Our refusal to hand over the box, among other vexing incidents, led to this declaration. I had to do something to save our skins. Our race had reported that some Europeans were exploiting oil. They were in caravans, and some of them were women. The Italians among them were quick to identify themselves, while the British oil men scowled at us and wanted us to leave location. The British oil men were instantly separated from the Italians and were summarily executed. The 118 Italians were escorted in caravans to Madonna, Mbano, Okigwe area inside the Biafran hinterland, where General Ojukwu had his army command headquarters. When General Ojukwu came out and identified me, he knocked off one of my teeth and ordered my arrest. But when he saw the train behind me, he quickly apologized and promoted me on the spot to the rank of captain. So this was the capture of the oil men was widely reported by the world press by me back then, by the way. But let's continue. Dr. Ndolo, on the other hand, disagreed with the Biafran headquarters directives. So we could have won the war if we had cultivated the friendship of the Biafran Vandals. These Midwestern Igbos were simply invincible. And I say this because I saw them in action. I saw them leave the safety of trenches and dare the army's firing power. Even among themselves, simple argument or disagreement is settled with CSM or any rifle at hand. We used to look on in awe as these weird young men opened fire on each other, smiling away at flying bullets. So when eventually the Biafran command understood they could not operate at all in the Midwest without the blessing of the Biafran Vandals, a local delegation of chiefs and elders of that area were sent to win their friendship. However, theirs was a conditional acceptance. We don't want your ammunition. We don't want your uniform. We don't want your pay. We don't want your orders. Therefore, in scattered bands of company strength or lesser numbers, this awesome group of military autonomous soldiers ruled at Mboto Ukpe in Ibusa, Asaba jungle, under the leadership of Oli Ewu Naaji. Oli Ewu Naaji. That is he that ate the goat with four. Somebody when they chop goats, when they command the hair, right? That's that. And that's pretty much like what we call the koko. You know, the wolf. I've been at the fox, the wolf. Anyway, at Omu, Mbuko, there was Pope Ekwensu. Pope Ekwensu. Ekwensu is what they call the Ishu or devil. But people have said that no, Ekwensu is not a devil. So he said the Pope Ekwensu, who led another group that sometimes joined the Biafrans fighting the Federal Army, but must be allowed to indulge in their whims without questions. Fond of nicknames, they had names like Charlie Bazooka, Westmoreland, Mad Major, Ibusa, etc. Fighting leathernecks that could qualify to lead any guerrilla organization in the world. Very sharp and mobile in ground assaults. They were so knowledgeable and accustomed to the topography of the area that night attacks were as easy to execute as daylight patrols. In the night, the federal advantage in superior arsenal was heavily outbalanced. Additionally, the Biafrans were scared stiff of river warfare and could not stick to the marshland. The Biafran Vandals' adept maneuvering ability and mobile handling of the canoes in the river fighting permanently crowned him the master in this particular terrain. Very soon, as they won many more battles, unrestrained power started going to their heads. They started treating the villagers like subjects, dishonoring their women and disrespecting the chiefs. About this time, the withdrawal from the bush of the Federal Army brought powerful Biafran Vandals face to face with the advancing Biafran Army. The stage was ripe for a major confrontation and the struggle for authority in the Bush War. When the Biafran troops in dire need of the Nigerian currency heard that Peter Pan and his unit had dumped the federal pay packets into the River Niger, Colonel Achuzia, commander of the commando unit, thought their cup was full. There were also stories emanating from Ibusa about the maltreatment of refugees in the bush by the Biafran Vandals unit in that sector. Looting and rape were familiar stories against them. Incensed Achuzia thereafter vouched their destruction because, according to him, they were no more useful. Towards the last month of 1969, trouble and blood trailed their footsteps. Rather than confer respectability on their sublime mission of protecting their brethren from two menacing armies in their neighborhood, an organized charade championed by their unit vandalized the people. For some of the refugees who sought solace in the bushes, it became another case of jumping from frying pan to fire. Michael Onweoyi Unwaelum, alias Oliewu Naji. So Oliewu Naji was a Nigerian soldier recruited and locally trained in the heat of the Nigerian Civil War. About August 1967, he returned home, deserting the Nigerian Army at Ilushi, when that riverside town in the defunct Bendia State fell to the Biafran Army. He remained at his hometown, Ibusa, till December of the same year. A combination of forces compelled him to cross to Biafra. Two factors were easily discernible. First, poverty, occasioned by the loss of his military job, The second factor derived from the first. A Nigerian Army sergeant dispossessed Oluwunaji of his girlfriend, the late Paulina Nketa, who was a palm wine and goat pepper soup seller along the Umeje Road, Ibusa. When the going was good, no one dared compete with him over Paulina. He still had with him some money he saved before his desertion. But then his funds went down. The serving Nigerian soldiers frequented the joint and seduced Paulina. Subsequently, Oluwunaji lost his girlfriend to the Nigerian Army sergeant. Humiliated, Oluwunaji could not tolerate the swaggering arrogance of the Nigerian soldiers in Ibusa and decided to cross to Biafra. When he presented himself for enlistment in Biafra, he was arrested at Atani, accused of being a Nigerian Army spy, and narrowly escaped execution. Meanwhile, Nigerian soldiers flooded Ibusa. There was no clear evidence, however, that the occupying federal troops were hostile to the Ibusa population, but having declared the Bende state the Republic of Benin, Biafrans thought that they had a duty to dislodge the Nigerian Army from any part of their domain. A detachment of the Nigerian Army was occupying the premises of St. Michael's Primary School at Okunta. Biafran troops based at Atani, of men of the West Niger Igbo origin, had decided to attack the Nigerian soldiers at St. Michael's Primary School. Biafran troops led by one Ajasko, generally believed to be the son of Obi of Ogwaji, trekked to Ibusa to launch the attack. Eyewitness account had it that the Biafran soldiers had almost encircled the St. Michael's Primary School in the early hours of Easter Monday of 1968, when suddenly an accidental discharge by a Biafran soldier alerted the Nigerian troops of the imminent attack by their Biafran enemies. The Nigerian soldier fired indiscriminately and succeeded in chasing back the Biafran invading troops, even before any attack was made. And all able-bodied Ibusa people ran into the bush for safety. Fearing that Ibusa people would be subjected to hostilities in the hands of the Nigerian soldiers as a result of the failed attack on them at St. Michael's Primary School, Oluwunaji crossed over to the Republic of Benin with a handful of Midwestern troops and set up a guerrilla outfit in the Ibusa bush, where thousands of Ibusa people were taking refuge. In this rescue operation, Oluwunaji and his troops carried out a series of ambushes against the Nigerian soldiers occupying Ibusa, which had been deserted by its inhabitants. His valor was easily recognized by the Biafran High Command. To ensure regular supplies, Captain Nebusa and a Biafran company were posted from across the River Niger to Ozala in Ibusa Savannah grassland, from where Oluwunaji drew his war arsenals. He made Ngboto Okpe his headquarters, but took no orders from anybody. This is a thick bush located on the northeast of Ibusa, which provided a hiding place for Ekumeku warriors who resisted British occupation of the West Niger Igbo area in the late 19th century. Ekumeku was a group of native warriors drawn from the old Asaba division, stretching from Asaba to Agbo. They operated in the fashion of guerrilla soldiers, laying ambushes all over the place for the advancing British occupation troops. This location once again repeated its historical significance when it became the headquarters of the soldiers of the Western Igbos or indigenes who were fighting to regain their fatherland between April 1968 and early January 1970. It is interesting to observe that Oluwunaji's grandfather, Obi Uwechwe Aponko, fought in the Ekumeku War against the British Colonial Occupation Army. The people of Ibusa were scattered in Ibusa bushes for about 2 years. Under harsh environmental conditions, Men, women, and children died of hunger, malaria attack, and stray bullet fired intermittently by the Nigerian troops. Ibusa people in the bush lived a nomadic life as they moved from place to place whenever the federal troops invaded their hiding places. It was difficult for the Nigerian soldiers to locate the civilian settlements because the Biafran soldiers lived among the people. Consequently, unarmed civilians were killed whenever the federal troops attacked. Ole Wunaji fought hard to defend his people and dislodged the federal troops or Biafran troops from Ibusa town, now overgrown by weed. As the saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Ole Wunaji had become so powerful that raw power got into his head. Ole Wunaji was easily irritable at the slightest provocation. Ole Wunaji. So, and penalty for the cause of provocation was instant death by shooting. Men were accused of being saboteurs. Such unlucky people were executed for mere suspicion. Some bizarre stories were told of how some civilians were forced to dig their graves. Ole Wunaji became so oppressive that the civilian population whom he came to protect made strenuous efforts to escape from his oppression. At the least opportunity, people surrendered to the federal troops who now set up a refugee camp at St. Patrick's College, Asaba. It was at this camp that the reigning senior Diopa of Ibusa, H.H. Obi Modi, died at a ripe old age. One early morning, a loud explosion was heard at the headquarters of Ole Wunaji. In a matter of minutes, the news went out that the war leader was dead through severe wounds sustained by an accidental discharge of Ogbunigwe is the Biafran bomb. They made their own bomb. The famous Biafran bomb, Ogbunigwe. Upon the death of Ole Wunaji, his troops scattered and the remaining civilian population still in the bush surrendered to the federal troops. Here's another one. Brigadier General Iweze loses 21 family members and how? This is how. Meanwhile, in 1966, when it was risky to be identified as Igbo, two Igbo officers defied the convention and went to battle against Biafra. Lieutenant Eboma was from Agbo, but the young officer who was in the limelight was Lieutenant Cyril Iweze, a cadet that carried the sword of honor as the best all-round officer among the Nigerian Defense Academy graduating infantry class of 1966. Iweze, who believes that trained soldiers have no business in politics, remembers that 1966 was a trying period in his career and the country. My father advised me to stay in Lagos and forget reporting to Enugu, pointing out that as a Western Igbo officer, I belonged to the federal side. The Biafra High Command did a lot to simplify the issue. They would not extend their invitation to outsiders. Only those officers whose states of origin fell within Biafra were invited to Enugu. Having lived most of my life in Lagos, I had no other place to go but to stick to the army that had just graduated me as its officer, he recalled. My first assignment was to command the A&E companies of the 26th Battalion, Nigerian Army. We saw immediate action at Ibina, Abakaliki, and Oka. I did not notice any resentment until I was ordered to capture Aguleri as the commander of the 141 Battalion. My support arm of engineers and rest were to engage and link up with me. They failed because they suspected I was going to sell out to my Igbo brothers. However, my brigade major, Muhammadu Bukwari, had a lot of confidence in me. Ignoring his colleagues' suspicion and bad faith, Iweze advanced, capturing Aguleri, and with the most outstanding strategy, succeeded in linking up Ogidi, and Onitsha at a later date. With that feat, a safe corridor from Ogidi town to the bloody Onitsha zone was finally created. This crucial victory by the Federal Army, ironically executed by an Igbo officer, can be imagined when the battle for Onitsha throughout the war remained the most deadly, and the market city constantly changed hands with the very great casualties on both sides. Suspected by his comrades in arms, marked down by his fellow tribesmen on the other side, Iweze's greatest nightmare was to unfold immediately the Biafrans surrendered. My victory celebration was short-lived. My native town of Ishu had been razed to the ground. I had lost 21 of my family members. All the Ishu survivors of that vandalism regarded me as a sellout, a saboteur. The officer did not waste time to identify the infamous Nigerian commander of that operation. In total resignation, he declared, "The scars of war have a wonderful way of healing. I am of a Christian upbringing. I believe in whatever will be, will be." In that operation, I lost 21 of my relations. Outside my immediate relations, I knew the people and the homes that were put on fire. But as I said, I have already forgiven them. The war taught us a lesson. Our people should and are coming back to rebuild, unite to form a force within the nation. This is to forestall what happened to us during the war. Brigadier General Iweze's experience during the war has been an asset in the management of Nigerian troubled sport. Behind the limelight, as soldiers should be, it was his command that resolved the 1973 NYSC crisis in Zaria. The 1980 Maiyegun riot, which erupted in Maiduguri in 1981-1982, and then in Yola in 1984. He finally destroyed the menace in Bauchi. In 1991, he was director of operations, ECOMOG. Seeing action in Liberia, he was in Somalia to familiarize with the Nigerian UN contingent in that troubled area as well. So that is Iweze, the Igbo soldier that fought on the side of the Nigerian Army. And yep. Anyway, there are some historical pictures here as well, you know, just part of the story. For example, right, this is Helene. I am Luma. I left from a Rolls Royce in 1958. Imagine that. She had a Rolls Royce as at 1958. A lady. See that lady here? All right. Then, who is she? Then you have a Miriam Ndidi Okogu. Okay. So that happened to be Miriam Babangida, who later married Babangida, by officer and gentleman. I think they were probably dating. So Babangida, who was also a soldier during the war, found Miriam. Let me show you Miriam. That's Miriam Okogu. Miriam Okogu here. There she is. We later this is Babangida. Babangida. So I think that was how they got to meet. They killed her father. They killed her brothers during the war. Then she ended up being the girlfriend of Babangida, who later became his wife. So who's that again? Yeah. Here is another one. Okay, Rosemary Amieze. Now, Rosemary Amieze was the most beautiful girl in Nigeria, Miss Nigeria 1960. That's her. That's Miss Nigeria 1960. Rosemary Amieze. Who else is there? And okay, Miriam went on to become the first lady of Nigeria when her husband, 20 years later, her boyfriend, then her husband, became the military head of state. Here you go. So that's Miriam. 15 years after the war, her boyfriend became, and she became first lady of Nigeria. That's also from the war. Now then we go on to chapter 9. Chapter 9 is, one sec. Good one. So chapter 9, the stateless people. And the first quote. The Western Igbos became the most vulnerable Nigerians, required 10 positive acts of loyalty to one of the rest of the nation to prove themselves human beings. Ever since the Midwest invasion, they had been hounded, hunted, killed, and considered greater security risk than the real Igbos themselves, the Western Igbos. So this was Wale Soyinka said, the man died. So the stateless people. So Helen Ayameluna of Ubodu and Rosemary Anieze Adams of Aniocha, Olono are stereotypical Western Igbo beauties with delicate poise and a mouth-watering facial overthrow of water maidens. The two women readily captured the Miss Nigeria crown in 1958 and 1960, respectively. During the war, Rosemary was on the run, a queen without recognition. Nigeria had little place for her, former beauty queen. Some neighbors in Lagos Street had reported to the rampaging street soldiers that there is an Igbo lady. There is an Igbo lady in our streets. Elsewhere, another African beauty related to the famous king's family of Kontagora, Niger State, was about making a decision that would prove monumental to her family and to a certain extent to Nigeria's future political development. This woman, who could be picked from a pack wrapped with the same fabric that matches her wear, was a northern Muslim married to an Asaba Christian. He spoke the Asaba Igbo dialect with the same romantic invitation by which the Anioma people are marked out from the Eastern Igbos. So we had Eastern Igbos, Western Igbos. The Eastern Igbos are like the Igbos outland. The Western Igbos are the Igbos that are just at the, how did they come by that, by the way? You know what I mean? Like Eastern region. Okay, I think I get it. The Midwest was created out of Western region, remember? So you have the Eastern region. But you see those who are like Igbos, like the Anioma, the Ogwaji Ukus, I can't remember all the names, sure you get, who are like part of what is today's Edo State, Delta State. You see, they were Igbos, yes, so they were considered as Western Igbos. So we had Western Igbos. And that is why it's easier for some of them to say they are not Igbos anymore after the war, because of what the Nigerian soldiers did to them. Because they were blamed too for what is going on in Biafra, right? So, okay, let's continue. So when Mr. Okogu, a former civil servant who had worked in northern Nigeria, brought in a second wife, nobody was perturbed. But when the war started, this peaceful woman decided to return to where she came from. The day she left Asaba, she packed and departed with her 3 children, Nneka, Ndidi, and Sonny Sparkle, her only son, then a television personality in Lagos. Years later, one of those children of this intertribal wedlock got married to General Ibrahim Babangida, becoming, for the records, Nigeria's most prominent first lady, Miriam. So here we go again. Papa Iweze, senior nurse at Oshodi Hospital. So that my son was in the Nigerian Army did not prevent soldiers from molesting me during the war, said Iweze. In Lagos, on one occasion, the news went around that Omo Igbo was around. The soldiers came to my house and demanded my ethnicity. I replied I was Igbo. Before they could do any damage, my son emerged and asked them to maintain discipline. The surprised soldiers demanded for his credentials. He promptly presented his papers. They never returned. In another case, I was in my office at the Osho, medical stores, Lagos. Those were dangerous days for the Igbos. The soldiers, after a tip-off, came into the hospital. A Yoruba nurse quickly admitted me in the ward and gave me a bed and covered me with bed sheets. On top, she placed a small girl and brought beside the bed the syringe and a drip table. On her toes, the nurse beckoned on the soldiers to come into the ward, putting her fingers on her mouth, begging for silence. Please do not wake up that sick child. He is in very critical condition, she whispered. On their toes, they sauntered across my bed. Another senior nurse, Mr. Anyanwu, was not so lucky. A few days later, his body was reported floating on Ejoor River. The problem of the Midwest states shortly before the war was complex. Reasoned Chief Okey Achamba, a Western Igbo trade unionist, returning from Geneva as the leader of Nigeria's transport workers delegation in 1967, he forewarned that Governor Ejoor's Yoruba origin, coupled with the fact that he was surrounded by Igbo military top brass, would inevitably lead to suspicion. Achamba agonized that the Midwest would end up an embattled zone. He therefore decided that even though he was a Western Igbo, Lagos should be the safest place for him and family. He predicted that Colonel Ejoor was more likely to tilt to the federal side, thereby encouraging snappy intervention from the eastern borders. He thought Lagos was a place to stay and watch the crisis, but two ominous developments in the Lagos area upset the apple carts and put his safety and family into jeopardy. An explosion at Casino Cinema, a heavily populated area of Lagos, killed many people and set up the Igbos in the area as accomplices. Secondly, a plane, an old American World War veteran B-26, apparently on a bombing mission, crashed in Lagos, killing all his crew. One of those who died in that ill-fated mission was Nigeria's schoolboy, football international, Possible Onyi. He was nicknamed Possible because he had a dribbling wisdom that defied space. With the ball, anything was possible with Onyi. But on that day, his mission to bomb Lagos proved a disastrous impossibility. Rather, that operation, coupled with the bloody provocations at the Casino Cinema, turned on the full screw on the Igbos, increasing local vengeance and putting the Igbos on the receiving end. Augustine Tolefe, an electrical engineer and a Western Igbo, was arrested and thrown into detention. Another Western Igbo, Mr. Onyemenam, a mining engineer and an expert in explosives, was commissioned by the federal government to analyze the bomb used at this cinema center. As a senior civil servant in the Ministry of Mines and Power, he realized that there was no order for explosives usually used in the just mines from companies or the ministry that matched the bomb's description. However, Onyemenam was to take to his heels in the midst of the investigation after repeated searches of his home by law enforcement officers. Halana, an engineer with the railways, was seriously beaten up by a gatesman who was a non-Igbo. Many, including Nwokoma Nwanji, received cane lashes from the civil defense personnel. Nwanji escaped death when an Hausa friend of his, Alhaji Widijalo, disregarded personal threats to his life, came forward to testify that Nwanji had nothing to do with the Biafrans, adding that everybody at Olonode Street, Yaba, knew this man as a family man who worked as a foreman in the railways. On the whole, as more brutal attacks were unleashed by soldiers and the security agents on the Igbos, The Western Igbos were not spared. Achamba continued. He wrote something down. He said, I was arrested one morning by a civil defense man. A Yoruba soldier walked up and assured me that my assailants would be taking me to Ikeja, where I would be shot. He therefore directed me to Yaba bus stop, where I should make myself scarce, disappear. My civil defense enforcer was not happy with the soldier and reapprehended me. A spirited protest from the soldier ensued. This gentleman lives here with his family and would not be a saboteur if his family were together with him. That was my closest to it. There was another case involving one Okonkwo, a Western Igbo, who had just returned from Canada on a federal government scholarship. As he was at Moleye Street, that's Moleye Street, Yaba, celebrating with his mates, the army badgered in and arrested them. One of them, Nnamdi Ugo, questioned the arrest. Why should we not, like other Nigerians, gather and celebrate a happy event? He asked. It was dealt with, and with one Beliosa taken to number 18, Akinwumi Street, Yaba. There, the soldiers found some cuttings of Odumegwu Ojukwu's pictures. They were all thrown into detention and were not released till the end of the war. So another one, Sergeant Benjamin was my boy. So Unwokole Oto, middle-aged employee of a private Lagos company, had the responsibility of identifying the Western Igbos living around his Ebutemeta address during the Civil War, describing the Igbos living in Lagos in those days as doomed. He recounted how he narrowly escaped death the day a Biafran aircraft bombed Lagos. The men of the Navy were trying out their anti-aircraft guns. Some debris fell at our residence on Ejoor Road, Ebutemeta. A mob gathered outside my house. Word had gone round that I was the saboteur who was responsible for the explosion that scattered the debris. While some were debating the incident, the police arrived. The mob shouted their sentence and wanted my summary execution. The police sergeant in charge of my case, after careful interrogation and intensive search, returned a verdict of not guilty. The crowd gradually dispersed. Many were disappointed. Otto revealed that he walked from Ebutemeta to Apapa every morning. That was the best option. Otherwise, if you join the bus or approach the bus stop, before long you would hear the soldiers shout their orders. All Igbos, come down. Some miserable Igbos would deny their fatherland, claiming Beni or ethnic origins. I was not ready for that disgrace. I told them that I was from Asaba. In those days, Igbos would be attacked in their homes, bus stops, offices, and collected to a spot. Sometimes the group you saw at a spot the previous week had disappeared. This particular attack party was commanded by a fierce Yoruba sergeant. He was manhandling his soldiers and kicking at the civilians. I was too afraid to raise up my head. Later, the man approached me and looked me over and stood still. He asked his aides to bring my papers. We were carrying identity passes in Lagos. After glancing through, he returned to my side. I started to tremble. At that instant, he ordered me to identify him. I could not raise up my head, and when he came again, he said that if I didn't identify him, he was going to rough me up and everybody sitting down in the sun would be sentenced. It was at this point that one of my relatives, Pando of Nepa, asked me to stop trembling and obey the orders. I started looking up. I managed to look at the man's face. Our eyes met, and I realized that the soldier's stare came from misty eyes. He had stopped talking. Suddenly, I leapt forward, and before I could hit the ground, Sergeant Benjamin my houseboy, caught me in the hair in an emotional embrace. When he put me down, all soldiers were at attention. Gentlemen, he announced, this now my father. If na bad person, na here if for pay. And to me, he said, yes, sir. You sabi me now. Now, Benjamin, release my father and everybody, he ordered subsequently. I remembered Benjamin, the younger brother to Blackie, in my Sapele household when I was working with USC. I treated my children and my house servants alike. When Blackie was ready to leave, I made sure I secured a job for him with the USC. He was so grateful to my family that he requested that his younger brother serve me. That younger brother was Benjamin. And if we were bad to him, probably Sergeant Benjamin, who was the master on that day, would have responded accordingly. Before he moved to the war front in 1968, he paid me 2 memorable visits, availing me the permanent passes and ample supply of army rotations. I pray he survived the war. With the turn of events, the Asaba Divisional Union with TD Rapu and Mr. Youngish Ishu held an emergency meeting and decided to contribute money to the troops' comfort fund. A program of voluntary donations run by the federal government with outside donations then. So it was a mark of intelligence and loyalty to the federal cause. When more molestations followed, the meeting was enlarged to embrace all the Igbo-speaking people of the Midwest living in Lagos. Decisions included a formal meeting with Chief Philip Asiodu, a prominent Asaba son who was in the Gowon's cabinet. Asiodu's peace formula. That's another one, right? So the formula puts the understanding that if the war was a unifying object, of a project rather, then the federal government should keep the Igbos, giving them maximum security. However, many Igbos in the public service were being slapped with leave papers, and those in private organizations were being sacked. And in spite of the Asiodu formula, the Western Igbos became a problem for the government. Chief Asiodu later met the government, and the Western Igbos' problems were evaluated. They were to pledge their loyalty to the federal government. As that loyalty was invariably in doubt, they had to take passport photographs and carry identity cards. More Igbos of the East at this junction declared themselves Midwesterners. Did you follow? This was the beginning of how people began to deny their Igbo connection. The conditions for them to not be killed, not to be assaulted, not to be profiled. So they had to say, okay, we are not like Igbo, we are Western Igbos. And listen, we are not even Igbo self. This is the beginning. So they had to carry identity card. Yeah, that was it. After the war, right? But maybe during and after the war as well, okay? Anyway, let's continue. Hang on, where were we? Where some of the, okay, said, I'll take that again, said, as that loyalty was invariably in doubt, they had to take passport photographs and carried identity cards. More Igbos of the East at this junction declared themselves Midwesterners. Ships landing in Lagos from Bendel areas, evacuating Northerners, got the go-ahead to evacuate the Midwesterners. But because there was no guarantee of the ship's safety from attack on their way back to Warri or Sapele Port, many Western Igbos turned tail. Another meeting of the Ika Igbo Union decided to send a delegation to the Midwest Governor, Colonel Ejoor. To this end, the delegation of 2 men, namely late FN Ebua of Ila, father of the Nigerian Television Authority's news presenter, Joe Ebua, and Chief JB Ekune of the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation, Lagos, were sent to Benin Their mission was to explain the situation in Lagos to Ejoor and pledge the loyalty of the Western Igbos to his government. They were to report back to the Union after the meeting in Benin. That was not to be. Chief Ebua was hijacked by the Biafrans to Enugu and placed in detention, and nobody saw him again till the end of the war. Chief JB Ekune, who managed to return to Lagos, was arrested and detained at Ikoyi prison till the end of the war. While in Nigeria, the Western Igbos could only earn their citizen rights with the production of their identity cards. Those of them who managed to cross the Niger in the face of the battle fire always had their stories. The beleaguered Biafra, teeming with refugees from all angles, was not prepared for a second exodus. This time from across the Niger, they were not prepared. The escapees problem was exacerbated at Onitsha, came under intense federal barrage, causing natives and residents to pack and join the exodus behind the Biafran line. Refugee camps were set up in primary schools at Ihiala, Ogidi, Oba, Ulako, Port Harcourt, Abakaliki, and other food-producing areas still safe from federal occupation. The Obi of Iseleuku, His Highness Osemene II, recounts that it was pathetic to see our people helpless in a foreign land. We had to put pressure on Colonel Ojukwu to release some money for the Western Igbo welfare. A special fund was therefore released from the 2 million pounds outside the salaries paid to workers before the fall of the Midwest, by the way, carted away from the central bank in Benin City to cater for the refugees. In separate experiences, Mrs. Anne Osuzoka, who was a refugee, told her story. She said, life at Ulako, a small village in the central Owerri province, essentially was a cultural clash, and people were living for the day. Because the place was small, the villagers knew almost all the refugees. The villagers could not believe that these people who in the morning would rise, take a stream bath, and go to the market to buy fish to be used for a pounded yam fish feast could be refugees. At one stage, the situation became so tense that the natives complained that these refugees would finish the waters of the stream in their ever-birthing spree. Those were the early days of camping. As the war progressed and food became more scarce, we were forced to make porridge from unripe pawpaw, and this was served with lizards and rats. Elsewhere, refugees organized their own farms, and in places like Arondizogu, natives provided them with seed yams to start their own farms. We started farming at 6 to 11 a.m. And when we planted cassava, in 6 months, we harvested the cassava and miserable yams and maize, said Chief Onwe Buzia, who left Asaba on the 5th of October 1967. However, the chief was thankful to the Arondizogu people for their pains, especially for the palm wine they provided for the refugees. Nonetheless, the Western Igbos were walking a very tight rope. In the camps towards the end, there was not much help from anywhere. The natives gave anything they still had to the Wandiani refugees, etc. So the refugee was a son of a female relation. By last month of 1969, most of the Biafran entity was on the run, and many people were running to their inland relatives and friends for solace. Hence, the distinction. Moreover, the Biafran army was facing serious depletion of manpower as a result of the bullets, as a result of the battles of attrition with the larger and better equipped federal troops. Recruiting for officers descended on the refugees camps and conscripted any male within sight. It was at this time that training in the Biafran Army was conducted directly on the first field experience in the battlefield. There were lots of recruits to be trained by very few training officers. The civilian refugees, while protesting vehemently, served in many fronts as the cannon foders of the Biafran Army. In London, 1968, Igbos west of the Niger Union. Here's another part of the whole story, right? In the face of acute shortage of food and medicaments, the Western Igbos had a surprise visitor on September 8th, 1969. Gabriel Onochie and delegation had flown through unsafe skies and dangerous airports of Uli from London via Lisbon. Their baggages were detained by Biafran authorities who wanted to divert those articles to the soldiers. In the face of attracting the hostile welcome of the Biafran hierarchy, Gabriel Onochie insisted on the release of his consignment. When the consignment was released, he personally took the drugs and money straight to the Western Igbos in refugee camps in Ihioma, Ihiala, and Ozubulu, leaving some of the medicaments with Dr. Ngozi Alana. Gabriel Onochie said that they had to brave the journey because his organization, the London chapter of Igbo West of the Niger, noticed that all the money, drugs, clothes, etc. sent earlier to our people in the refugee camps never reached them. Moreover, we saw a lot of Biafrans coming to London to collect these donations, which were collected originally by us. But we don't see our people. We therefore wrote a petition to Colonel Ojukwu and the delegation headed by C.C. Modi, Captain Anoku, Professor Onwuje Geku, came down to London. When they left, my organization decided to send a fact-finding party to Biafra. The Union of the Igbos of the West Niger was formed following two major developments in London in 1968. Onochie explained that the union took off as a result of the double rejection of citizenship rights by the Nigerian embassy and the Biafran House in London, respectively. Two incidents, he recalled, led to the formal formation of the union to pursue the interest of our people in the absence of any other authority to perform such jobs. He said that in 1968, the Nigerian House directed that the Midwest Igbos should take oath of allegiance to the federal government. That was surprising, as all along, the belief was that the federal government was fighting the rebels to keep Nigeria one, not fighting all Igbos. Secondly, there was a reported child theft involving a woman of Western Igbo origin in the same year. She was asked by the Nigerian embassy to report herself to the Biafran House when she came there for help. On getting to make her case to the Biafran House, the Biafran officers headed by Kubara urged the lady to return to Nigeria House because legally and politically, you are not in Biafra. We, the Igbos of the Western Nigeria of all shades of opinion and sympathies, were therefore highly incensed and thereon decided to form the Igbos of the Niger to seek and protect our interests. Therefore, on getting to Biafra, flying without light signals or landing facilities, our discovery was very unpleasant. The soldiers were starving, they could not lift their guns, and there were multiple disagreements among our officers. They were advised to seek avenues of reaching their federal counterparts and start thinking about avenues of reaching amicable accord in time. They should embark on this venture with the sole knowledge that Biafra was about to collapse, and they should never wait for it to collapse on us again. Our people's suffering should come to an end, we advised. On the federal side, incessant efforts and petitions to Colonel Ogbemudia, who had succeeded Ejoor as Midwest governor, were responsible for his supportive roles and magnanimous rehabilitation of the refugees. He took proper interest in our people. He transferred St. Patrick's College Asaba to St. Anthony's College, Oku, expanded Olomina Grammar School, Onitsha Olono, to accommodate girls from the war areas. He also gave opportunities to retired army officers who returned from detention. Right, so this was Lagos identity card for the Igbos. Imagine that. This is Madam Bridget. Madam Bridget. Her name is Madam Bridget. Now, let me show you that. See, this one under here. Right, that was the identity card that they had to give to all the Igbos in Lagos who are ready to claim that they are not like the Igbos, they are Western Igbos. In order for them to be able to, that didn't stop them from being harassed though. So you get now. Like the women, when they started like not treating the Igbos as Nigerians, that the Igbos have to prove that they will be loyal to Nigeria. They said they should swear to an oath. Like, I don't understand that you have to keep people. You have to keep them in a country. When they said they were living, you fought a war, a genocidal war, a serious ethnic cleansing to keep them, in order to keep them in Nigeria. Now, keeping them in Nigeria, but at the same time, right, they do not have, or they won't have the same rights like other Nigerians. So you get, this is the dark side of that your war. Sorry, I've started losing a part of the book. What the heck? Okay. So I have chapter 10. I think we can still read chapter 10 before we call it a day and orphan the students. So chapter 10. That's something I want to check out. Chapter 11. Okay. So let's go through the 10th chapter now. Chapter 10. Rehabilitation of the West Niger Igbos. Okay. West Niger Igbos. I hope you are paying attention to all this identity that everybody is kind of like having to coin for themselves. Different identity that they have to adopt. Because in the whole scheme of things, in this fake Nigeria back then, and as it is right now, people had to survive, right? They had to, number one, drop their real identities. Here you get now, they have to claim that they are not really Igbos, or they are the Western Igbos, or they are like, they don't even have anything to do with Igbos. Like these days, you will see a lot of them, even though they are Igbos, in Delta, in Rivers, in Edo, you will see Igbos, all these places who are like indigenous to these areas. But they will tell you that they are not. We are not Igbos. We are Ika. We are Anioma. We are, you know what I mean? I've seen a lot online, and it's been like an identity crisis. So what birthed all of this identity crisis was because of the way the genocidal soldiers of Nigeria, who were called the federal troops, is the way they treated the Igbos and anyone that has Igbo ancestry or Igbo, what have you, then, so you are automatically considered enemy and you must be killed or slaughtered. So to stay alive, if you survived, then you probably have to just say you are not Igbo. So we are not Igbo. So we are not Igbo. So please, please don't treat us as one. No. That was how the identity crisis you are witnessing today became a thing. Everybody should be proud of their own ancestry. You should be proud of who you are. But Nigeria is a place whereby, you didn't choose where to come from, Abi. All of us just open our eyes. Wah, ma, ma, ma. And then you open your eyes and say, your name shall be Owotu Egu. And you'll be like, okay, does that mean that I'm Igbo? You say, yes, you are Igbo. It's okay, great. Oh, your name shall be Azan Isa. I say, what does that mean? They say, you'll be Hausa. Say, okay, I'm Hausa. Oh, your name is going to be Ogundeji, Ogunjimi. I say, who you be? Say, I'm a Yoruba. Oh, I'm a Yoruba. Nobody chooses where to be born. But now you are here, and you are in this chaotic, this chaotic fake contraption where, where you come from, you will be judged by where you come from. You will be judged. You'll be treated, right? And you are expected to inherit, other people's enemies, so that to show that you belong. It's all mad, right? But let's go to this Western Igbo that we have been hearing, West Niger Igbos. So here is the quote, the starting quote from Henry Dunant, founder of the Red Cross, and it's called A Memory of Solferino. Solferino has become the center of the bloodiest battle Europe has ever experienced. 500 soldiers were crowded inside, another 100 lying under the canvas to protect them from the sun. Some women went into the church and passed from man to man with jars of clean water to quench their thirst and bathe their wounds. Some of these improvised nurses were beautiful and charming girls. Their gentleness, their tearful, compassionate looks, and attentive care rallied their patients' courage. I sought to organize relief as best as I could in areas which seemed to need it most. That's a quote. But now to the proper one, rehabilitation of the West Niger Igbos. Federal reconstruction, rehabilitation, and reconciliation efforts were stimulated by the shepherd roles of a number of Christian missionaries. There was Miss Backhouse of the Anglican Mission at Asaba Girls Grammar School, who braved the flying bullets and saved a lot of girls from molestation. Father Colon gave life and hope to his flock. He ministered to countless civilians who relocated from the township to the St. Patrick's College Refugee Center. Ibusa and Father Jonosia. Probably the war would have taken a different turn, but for one young Catholic Reverend Father from the dreaded village of Obonkpa, Father Osia's takeover from Father Patrick Ekpo as the Ibusa parish priest on the advance of the federal troops was like any other ordinary posting, usually instructed by the bishop from Benin, the state capital. Later, this man of God with the tiny frame of Hitler was to combine raw native guts, ecclesiastical diplomacy, and tactical military improvisation to prevent further decimation of these Igbos caught between the surrounding jungles of Ibusa and the Niger River. Father Osia received his first national attention when on November 9, 1968, the International Observer Team under General W.A. Milroy of Canada arrived at St. Patrick's College, Asaba. This team, which was also made up of Lieutenant Colonel Douglas J. Keynes, United Kingdom, Lieutenant Colonel T. Kumanek of Poland, and Captain Yoma Shizo of Ethiopia, was in St. Patrick's College refugee camp at Asaba to verify allegation of genocide against the Asaba people on October 7, 1967. Father Osia was blunt. A year ago, my people were massacred. I don't know whether you call it genocide or atrocity. He left the observers to ponder about the exact answer to their question. Father Osia, several months later, volunteered that the Federal Army chaplain, Colonel Pedro Martins, had advised him to leave the camp and learn to be diplomatic, but your remark was not well taken by General Gowon. Father Osia never left the camp or his people. However, when he left, it was on his own terms. He felt that Ibusa by 1969 should be repopulated and under the blaze of Biafran gunfire crossed the River Niger. Solicited and got permission from the 2nd Division Commander, Colonel I.B. Aruna, to return his parishioners to the parish in Ibusa. In his own words, we began leaving St. Patrick's College, Asaba, for Ibusa on the February 7th, 1969. By the 9th, the camp at St. Patrick's College had completed movement to Ibusa. On getting to Ibusa, he was surprised that the people who ran into the bush because of the pillage of 1968 were not in a hurry to return to their homes. It was then that he decided that only the welfare and safety of his own returning refugees would convince those taking refuge in the bush to return. As a matter of fact, the bush was a refuge for those Ibusa men, women, and children, and people from the surrounding village of Achala, as well as some Asaba people who took to their heels when the federal troops finally sacked the town of Ibusa. Regarded as the most populous among the Oshimili people of the River Niger, Ibusa escaped the first wave of atrocities that befell Asaba in 1967. On learning that Ibusa actually produced senior rebel officers, namely Colonel S.B. Nwaje, Mike Okwechime, Henry Igboba, and Major Abat Okonkwo, federal troops on the next Biafran provocation and in one operation scorched this beautiful plateau's country town and put the people into flight. In the bush, the escaping natives, mostly civil servants, school teachers, and pensioners, met many other refugees from Ibusa. They decided that with their horrid experience and the danger around the towns, the bush should be the best place for safety. They found food in the crops they cultivated and provided themselves with water from surrounding streams. Away from the slaughter at Asaba and Ibusa, these otherwise decent people, in the many months they lived under the trees. Indeed, by appearance, the habitat became the real Bushmen of Africa. Father Osia's effort to bring them back to civilization in the heat of war was the central focus of the rehabilitation effort that later involved the Pope and the Catholic Secretariat, the Quaker Service of America, and the Midwest government under Colonel Samuel Ogbemudia. Father Osia's administration operated with 5 independent departments, namely finance, transport, relief, education, and the civil defense, all of which reported to him. At this point, Father John Osia was transformed from a mere parish priest and by and large was regarded as the civilian administrator or representative of the Igbo people immediately west of the Niger. Governor Ogbemudia was so impressed by the administrative skills of this young priest that he appointed him member of the Midwest Reconstruction and Rehabilitation Committee with effect from July 25, 1969. Most of the refugees were satisfied with the rations that were distributed by the Food and Transport Committee. By far, the most impacting department was the civil defense. The civil defense's primary function was to defend the refugees from harassment by the soldiers of the two armies, seek information and intelligence aimed at preventing further Biafran guerrilla attacks against Ibusa, as each strike opened up the civilians for retaliatory federal attacks. Finally, Father Osia thought that if he succeeded in establishing a feeling of friendship and trust with the Nigerian army, those in the bush might reconsider their stand and return. His efforts were made difficult by continuous harassment by elements of the Nigerian soldiers in the town and the organized Biafran effort to keep the civilians bound to the bush. After all, a peaceful Ibusa was not in their best military strategic interest. On April 24, 1968, one Paul Osonye Obodoechina led a civil defense drive into the bush to rescue the civilians held by rebel stragglers. According to the letter of tribute to this brave Ibusa young man who had vowed to do everything, including risking his life in the campaign for the mass return of Ibusa people, Obodoechina was among the first to distribute leaflets urging the people in the bush to return to town. He was not allowed much time to explain his mission. The Biafran guerrilla forces in the bush gunned him down. Return of the refugees and the founding of Ibusa Hospital. Now, with more people returning from the bush, food supplies naturally increased. Arrangements were made through government to increase the number of bags of gari meant for the refugee center. About 10 cows were butchered and shared out to the people on a daily basis. However, Father Osia recollected one unfortunate event that later turned out a blessing for the refugees while in camp at St. Patrick's College. At the camp in 1968, there was an outbreak of a measles epidemic. A classroom was converted into a clinic, with members of the Red Cross serving as hospital attendants. However, the army was to kick the Red Cross out after suspecting some of them of collaborating with the Biafrans. The military brought their own medical staff and nurses into the camp, and after the epidemic was checked, the need for a hospital was felt. After moving to Ibusa from Asaba, Reverend Osia maintained the hospital with the little infrastructure at hand. This time, it was named the Cottage Hospital and staffed with a number of health professionals, including refugees. Amongst them were 5 qualified nurses from the Midwest government, 2 midwives, and a doctor. This number, added to the original hospital staff of the Emergency Cottage Hospital and Maternity, made for a full-staffed cottage hospital. In the weeks following the end of the war, this cottage hospital was granted a general hospital status when Colonel Ogbemudia, at the close of a development program organized at the Oba's Palace, Oba Square, Benin, asked Father Osia to follow him to his office. Before some members of his cabinet, he said, "Father, your persistent request is granted. Go and get a piece of land for a hospital for Ibusa." On getting to Ibusa, he conveyed the governor's wishes to the elders of the town, and within 7 days, an equatorial forest was cleared near the Obochi River, and Ibusa, for the first time since independence, was to celebrate the foundation of his community general hospital. Therefore, on May 16, 1970, proud visiting Nigerian head of state, General Yakubu Golos, in planting the symbolic umbrella tree to mark the memorable creation of the hospital, commended the government and the Catholic mission for the rehabilitation efforts on that part of the Niger. Also, that's for the founding of the Ibusa. United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and the Quaker Services also moved in. The story. There were 2 American agencies whose intensive relief programs on the West Niger River is very many ways paved the way for the return of normal life for these war-battered people during and immediate after the war. As centers of destruction, Asaba and Ibusa were selected for a special survey concluded by the USAID and the Quaker Service. The result of the survey, conducted in October 1969, formed the basis of an project agreement 220/995-793-31 between the USAID, the Quaker Services, and the Midwest Committee for Reconstruction and Rehabilitation. The project directors, Larry Archibald and Oluaino, all took residence at Ibusa in June 1970. Their activities were limited by the resources at Quaker Services, but significant progress was made in school repairs, school furniture supplies, and rehabilitation of farmers. The USAID offered £315,000, most of which was originally intended to be spent on a housing project as well as certain public works in Asaba and Ibusa towns. At the request of the Midwest Ministry of Economic Development and Reconstruction, the geographical area was redesigned to cover the environs of Asaba and Ibusa. In July 1970, a survey of the rehabilitation needs of 30 more villages and projects in Ishagu, Achala, Oko, Ogbele, Oko, Anala, Amakon, Okpanam, and Okwe was completed. Besides housing, other needs for improving the conditions of the people were embarked upon as follows. 1, or A, the successful relationship between Quaker Service and the Ministry of Education. B, the need to re-employ people and bring cash from outside into the community. C, rebuilding of houses damaged by the war. D, the necessity to walk through the Midwest government subsidized stores. And E, various restrictions put forward by USAID. So in the light of this, the project agreement or rehabilitation programs moved in the following directions. 1, heavy emphasis on school. 2, work with local artisans and carpenters. 3, production of unusual items for the subsidized stores to establish low prices. So Field Director Richard Griffiths, who succeeded Calais Williams, very quickly grasped the complications of the program and was an asset in planning and counseling. It became necessary to separate the office from the official residence in Ibusa. Project opened an office in Asaba to treat problems and questions arising in Asaba area at first hand. So the program for schools had 3 parts. 1, school repairs. 2, school rebuilding. And 3, school furniture supplies. So 1, the Ministry of Education, payment of wages for all skilled labor, determination of all areas of need, and direct distribution of furniture on the basis of need. 2, communities, supply of unskilled labor and provision of storage and security for materials. 3, Quaker Service, supply of all materials, supervision, coordination, and welfare of workmen. So Quaker Service, working with a clear timetable, contributed to the effort of the government, whose needs were out of proportion with its resources as a result of the war. Major repairs concentrated on Sacred Heart School, Ibusa, St. John's School, Achala, and St. Patrick's School, Cable Point, Asaba. Not all schools were fully repaired in Asaba. The following schools: Holy Trinity School, Convent Girls School, St. Thomas School, and St. Patrick's College, LA School, and all Saints schools needed repairs, but by December 7th, 6 classrooms, 1 headmaster's office, and 1 store were rebuilt in each school. Pupils resumed classes in Achala and Oppu by the end of the year 1970. Remember? Now, the communities of Ishiagu, Oppu, and Achala was of immense assistance by providing the children a suitable atmosphere for learning. The ministry attributed furniture for 6,000 pupils. The 2 objectives during this period were the provision of goods and services for direct benefit to rehabilitation efforts. Some 370 units of door frames, 192 units of window frames, and hundreds of flush door shutters were distributed. The Ministry of Social Welfare at that time sent an official to Achala and Ishiagu to organize the operation of the Gari machines. The ministry also contemplated forming a cooperative society in each of the communities so that they would increase their networking and local businesses proceeds. The number of fishermen increased in the communities beyond those who could afford to buy fishing equipment, to the extent that the communities had enough fish to eat and extra to sell. An outboard engine boat was provided by Ogbele community for conveying farm products, and for transportation. Look at that. That looks beautiful. You know? Anyway, here is another part. How they were even like, man, I love this. It's kind of like, you know, well, this is after the whole program, after the whole genocide, the massacre, and the all what have you done by the Nigeria, okay? So the rebuilding process of this war-torn region of Nigeria, the Midwest, the Midwesterners then, like, you know, begun. And this is kind of like the documented effort in that regard, okay? What time do we have? So I've only got just about 15 minutes to go. Brilliant. Let me read this. Asaba and Ibusa rehabilitation programs from January 1st, 1971 to March 31st, 1971. So quicker service activities during this period were largely focused on extensive local purchase of timber and cement. In anticipation of housing, market, and school construction in the following months. It was also a period of numerous meetings and negotiations at the community level. In addition to the provisions of cement and block making molds to the communities of Oko Ogbele, Oko Alana, Anala, Oko Amakon. Oko means kind of like bush, if I'm kind of right. Oko. Anyway, Oko. Right. So quicker service provided additional timber with which to complete primary schools in Achala and Okwe. The construction of the primary school in Ishiagu continued. Materials were provided for 4 schools still being repaired in Asaba, which were earlier partly occupied by the army but recently vacated. The Achala workshop was reactivated with 30 carpenters, and discussions were held with the Ministry of Education about the formation of a workshop in Okpanam. Quicker service calculated that 80 carpenters working for 6 months would complete the furniture project in July. Quicker service continued to support a local enterprise in Ibusa, Koma Nigeria Limited, which was established to manufacture doors and window frames, panel and shutters. Their products were purchased by Quicker Service for allocation to the Midwest government subsidized stores in Ogwaji and Asaba. The agreement between Koma and Quicker Service dated January 14th, stated that a loan of material worth 30,000 naira will be given to that company to be repaid during a 9-month period, and up to 99,500 naira worth of products will be purchased by Quicker Service. Occupational assistance was given to fishermen in 4 villages in January. 2 garri grating machines and 1 Archimedes engine were presented to communities to be communally owned and operated. Committees were established in each village to administer the proceeds from these enterprises. 1 outboard engine was supplied to Oke Ogbele. So, according to them, the Oko Ogbele, they had 500 fishermen, 1,300 nets, 3,300 hooks. They had 300 floaters. They do not have any grating machine. This is how they shared the whole thing, right? So they say in Oko Anala, they had 500 fishermen as well. They had 1,200 nets, 300 hooks, 300 floaters, no grating machine. Oko Amakom, they had 300 fishermen, 1,000 nets, 1,800 hooks, 2,000 floaters, no grating machine. Ishiagu had 400, Ishiagu had 400 fishermen, 1,000 nets, 2,200 hooks, 2,000 floaters, and 1 grating machine. Achala had no fishermen, they had no net, they had no hooks, they had no floater, but they had 1 grating machine. Anyway, so in Asaba, Quicker Service continued negotiation with the Ministry of Education about the reallocation of mechanical equipment valued at 8,000 naira. Preliminary discussions indicated the feasibility of working closely with the Niger Trade School and Electronic Trade School, both of which were located in Asaba and were heavily damaged by the war. After lengthy discussion, the community leaders and the government agreed that the Ogbeogonogo market on the main road in the center of Asaba will be repaired and expanded rather than the heavily damaged cable point site. Quicker Service began delivery of building materials in mid-February. The Asaba Urban District Council agreed to hire and pay for skilled labor. The Ministry of Works and Transport submitted a list of needed supplies, and after review and realistic changes by the Quicker Service, all agreed that this revised list was the basis upon which work would proceed. Again, after discussions with government and community, it was decided that Quaker Services would construct public toilets in Asaba. The new toilet will be constructed at Ogonogo Market, and existing ones will be repaired and completed at Cable Point. The unfinished toilet facilities at Cable Point were in fair conditions, as I put it. Negotiations continued with the Midwest State Water Board, and during this period, a list of equipment needed for repairing and expanding the Ibusa water system was drawn up by the Water Board. Quaker Service agreed to underwrite the purchase of equipment worth 15,000 naira. With the restoration of feasible infrastructure in the heavily damaged towns of Asaba and Ibusa, the attention of the government and the people turned to education. Education, since the turn of the century, has been the major engagement of these Western Igbos, and therefore the Nigerian Civil War. They conveniently served in the state bureaucracy in Benin and were by and large major policymakers in Nigeria's civil service. With thanks to God and to the then Governor Brigadier Samuel Ogbemudia, I shall close this by reproducing a letter from the senior district officer of the military government who, in pleading that I should be allowed to complete my education unmolested in 1972, expressly described the position of the government and in many ways made this work possible. So that was the letter of the letter. You see, the letter was the letter written to support this publisher in going back to school, right? And why he must not be molested or harassed, because he's an orphan. They've killed his dad, they've killed his ma, they've killed a member of his family. So this was who wrote that? Yeah. From producing a letter, okay, from a senior district officer. And his name is F.P. Odiatu. Anyway, that's just that. What I have next is, yeah, that's the list. It's called the Ibusa Bush Rescue Operation. Those who did what and how they got people out of the bush. It wasn't easy in 1969. How they managed to get a lot of the people back into the town of Ibusa and what have you, you know. So what we have next is going to be the series of letters, releases. I don't think we are going to really need much of that. I've seen something called the secret, you know. Let's try and get a book, okay? Maybe next time we're going to have a chapter. We're going to have a chapter 11, or maybe we should just finish it. Chapter 11 and then the conclusion. Oh, I'll do it next time. Don't worry. I'm just like talking out loud. Anyway, we seem to have covered the grievous part of that history and how things got shaped to what you have today in Nigeria, and why the Igbos became endangered species in Nigeria. How the framers of this fake contraption managed to institutionalize the hatred towards the surviving Igbos. What they did to those who never really was part of the war, to even put it that way, right? Those who were supposed to have been the liberated people, how they turned their guns on them and slaughtered, you know, millions of them in in what you can call the race baited rage. It was not about the war. It was pretty much like against the anything Igbo. So, and yeah, a lot of us who are here today, we have inherited that same kind of like a profiling and hatred. All right. even though it's also exposed the lie about one Nigeria. Sure, you get now. So if there's anything at all that this generation have to kind of have at the back of your mind, is that you must remember that we are not one. And the rogues, the genocidists that killed millions of people to force the Igbos to still be part of this contraption, if some of them are still alive today, I can tell you that majority of them should be living in regrets, because whatever it is that they saw in 1967 to 1970, that they felt they are fighting to keep this contraption together, majority of them today should be living in that regrets. Like, man, we shouldn't even have, like, we should have just let these Biafrans, they should just have, like, we should have let them go on their own then. We shouldn't even have ventured into, starting a war only for the descendants, our own descendants, because their own descendants, their own children too. They are all trapped in this contraption. Some of them died. They died in penury. They died wretched. Their salaries were unpaid, their pensions unpaid, and where they are paid, eventually, like most of them actually have no real care, medical or what have you. So Nigeria keeping this contraption together, it's only just for the few, for the few who believes that it is Nigeria is the estate of their forefathers, some would say. So if you have any of your family member who fought during the war, they probably will be like a very old now. Ask them, is this what they fought for? So keep this contraption together so that the rest of us can actually really suffer what we have today. Don't worry. I'll see you later this evening, okay? Let me go get myself ready for that. Good afternoon.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Maiyegun ti dé o, ọ̀rẹ́ ará ìlú.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Lórí Facebook, lórí YouTube.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Gbogbo bó ṣe ń lọ ni Maiyegun já wa sí.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Àṣírí ọ̀jẹ̀lú kì í bò níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Bó bá ṣe eré, àní Maiyegun máa wí.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Ó sì tún ṣe eré, wàá gbọ́ níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Maiyegun Diary, Diary Politico.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Godfatherism kò sí lọ́rọ̀ Maiyegun.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Ẹ farabalẹ̀ sẹ́ o kẹgbọ́rọ̀ lẹ́nu o.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Àní Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé. Maiyegun ti dé.
Ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Lórí Facebook.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Lórí YouTube.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Bọ́ bàbá gbé wúrẹ́.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Ijó ìgbádìyẹ.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Prẹ̀sìdó bá rúfin o.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Kí gómìnà kówó jẹ.
Maiyegun
ọlọ́pàá tí ń darí bá
Maiyegun máa wí.
ayé ẹ̀sùn rájì
Maiyegun ti dé.
aṣòfin tí ń rúfin o
Maiyegun máa wí.
ayé ẹ̀sùn rájì
Maiyegun ti dé.
òpùrọ́ olóṣèlú
Maiyegun máa wí.
ayé ẹ̀sùn rájì
Maiyegun ti dé.
ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn rájì
Maiyegun ti dé.
ayé ẹ̀sùn rájì
Maiyegun ti dé.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn rájì Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn rájì ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dèrò ní fi wọ́n níran òun èèyà.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn rákì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn rákì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ òní fi wọ́n níran.
wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀ o Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò bẹ́ẹ̀ wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀ Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò bẹ́ẹ̀ oníkanṣá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe fáwọn ará ìlú tó gbé wọn débẹ̀ o àyè.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ súnra kì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ súnra kì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ òní fi wọ́n níran.
ha kì máa yí ṣe eré ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣe ẹ̀fẹ̀ kì máa yí ṣe eré ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣe ẹ̀fẹ̀ ẹni bá ti lè lẹ́bọ̀ lẹ́rù o ọmọ bá dèrò kàṣà ìtú wọn síta.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ súnra kì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ súnra kì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ òní fi wọ́n níran.
tẹnitẹni ọmọ Maiyegun ọ̀rẹ́ ara ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni mo fọlọ́hún ṣọ́ ẹ̀ bá kìlẹ́bù lóòótọ́ olódodo ìlú ọ̀tá ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni ìwọ ṣá máa ń ṣọ́ra kò sì mọ́ bẹ̀rù bọ́tà ń lè rí bóníṣègùn lé káwọn mọ̀mọ́ fi ṣera wọn ni ó ti dẹ̀rùn tí wọn ò gbọ́dọ̀ sè mọ́bẹ̀. èèpo ọ̀bọ̀lọmọ bá dérò tàjẹ́ ò gbọ́dọ̀ jẹ́ ó ti jọba lórí abínú ẹni kò sì mọ́ bùyà àìsíwọ́lu ní ẹnìkẹ́ ìgbódì ẹ̀yìn lábàrá o ó kó ẹni tó bá dán o àkàmù. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì o ẹni bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dèrò òní fi wọ́n níran o.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ súnra kì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ súnra kì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ òní fi wọ́n níran.